Human history is broadly made of only two kinds of periods, and the transitions and ebbing between them. Times of crisis and times of stability. In times of stability, the great ongoing project that is civilization grows and expands. In times of crisis, it is attacked, shrinks, and diminishes. Calamity, polycrisis, and all its accursed demons, war, natural disasters, famine, and disease are within these dangerous times. The loss of the mandate of heaven, and the end of dynasties. The empire, long divided, must unite. Long united, must divide. Thus, it has ever been. Amidst this, what then is a hero? What sets heroes apart? It is within these terrible times that their deeds emerge, their efforts, their sacrifices, to preserve the dignity of humankind. And against them, what is a villain? The answer as well emerges simply. Those who would take advantage of those perilous times for their self-advancement, for greed and selfishness. Amidst these sufferings, can happiness emerge? Can it be deservedly earned once the crisis is finished? However, the world we live in is not that of our ancestors. Humanity in the past could consign the crisis to the punishment of gods, of vast Mother Earth. We were but another child at the whims of the winds of fate. We huddled around the fire by our caves in the night, then our homes by the fields. We no longer live in that world. Humans expanded their will, and they set that will to learning. With learning came naturally knowledge. It birthed the age of connections. It ripped shadow from the maps of humankind. And in its place, the seals of chemistry, physics, and biology were broken. The fissile box of Pandora was eventually opened, and its plastic and steel lid removed. What emerged was the greatest period of blessings. What emerged was an easing of the burden of humankind. But also, what emerged were terrible curses, a boundless hunger and the arrogance which fed upon and grew from this power. The beams of heaven and the foundations of the earth were now lashed and eaten by the machines of humanity. In the blinding light of our advancement, we grew not just to fear, but despise the shadows of night. This is the stage we emerge upon, the perilous world of the now. Once I cared not for this knowledge. Once I saw the world through narrow blinders. I, perhaps like you, was frustrated at the scale of the problems. But something opened my eyes. A legend of great heroes, of great villains, of great machines, of the amazing power of human technology, and its cavernous dangers and its curses it unleashed. I will show you how it was woven, the vast efforts and who made them, the story of this masterpiece. But first, while I came to this knowledge, its presenting to you was only enabled by the help of the following outlaws, those who hide and funded my efforts today, from their redoubt on Heaven's Pillar Mountain. So I must, of course, give deserved praise. First, as always, is Skuttlefish, my austere and generous benefactor, but as well, great thanks to Helix 11411, New Type 1D, Arsen Osokin, Fabian Borges, USS ZILLA NCC 1998, Reiayanameme, Pink Supervisor, Tonster, Freshbone, Jesus Avila, 5 Marks, Michael Behrens, Mavrilyn, Emil, Thermidor Otstarva, Lucas Machin, DeepStateNine, Rylan Browner, Rendar, Francisco Esqueda, Louis Correa, Domestica 1664, Gabaghoul, Andrew Ziggas, Speedking Oz, Mike Murdock, Dopamine Cloud, Excelsis Caeli, MiracleMajutsu, Julian Johnson, JXP, Ranger Carl, Zachary Tevel, Cade Z, AJ Brown, Genzino, Carl Hagar, Not Very Subtle, Ethan Banks, Osokin 1, Metal Dragon, and Matthew Totaro. To my compatriots who have aided me, I wish upon you all the 5 blessings of long life, wealth, health, virtue, and a peaceful fate. With that, I place down the pen of the scholar and grasped the journey staff of the traveling Daoshi. For you see, I, like so many of this world, felt despair. I too coiled in fear at the deep shadows of night. But this epic I took in. I contemplated its meanings and cultivated myself in thought. What emerged is what I now give to you today. Some will not accept this. The righteous path is a narrow and arduous one. Some will dismiss it, as they always have, and always will. But for those who journey with me today, I offer what I found. Hope. Blazing hope. I found the meaning. The story of giant mechanical gods. The story of history's greatest heroes. Of the experts of justice, their celestial 9, against Big Fire and their magnificent 10. That happiness can perhaps be achieved without sacrifice, and the nature of the beautiful night. That villains deserve no mercy, and who the true villains of humankind are. In this, its story, on Giant Robo, the day the Earth stood still. To arrive at the creation of Giant Robo is to trace a kind of borderline miraculous series of events. The phrase lightning in a bottle doesn't even come close to the strange series of dominoes which had to fall into place to give life to this epic project. In telling you that story, I feel you will only further appreciate its creation, the quality of its creation, and the efforts of those who made it come to life. As always, I will give you context first. Giant Robo's existence was enabled by two incredibly important Japanese people, who no doubt have affected your life without you even knowing it. Yuma Shiraishi and Shizuo Takano, who working together for the Japanese JVC Corporation produced the VHS project, an ability to portably imprint audio and visual information onto compact, flexible magnetic tape. With this, consumers could now affordably own entire shows and movies for personal use. No more would large cumbersome film prints be manually loaded into projectors. The already ubiquitous television set would serve the purpose. These technologies would only be further advanced by David Paul Gregg's and James Russell's creation of the optical video disc, storing the information as pulses of deflected light rather than as magnetic signals. These four scientists laid the groundwork for what was to come. The turning point would be in 1983, where after a confluence of fate, Dalos, created by Hisayuki Toriumi, would debut as the first successful original video animation, or OVA. Being primarily directed by his now renowned disciple, Mamoru Oshii. With this, the OVA era began. A new field of media projects became possible. Formerly, the primary medium had been, and remains, television. A modular block of roughly hour to typically half-hour animation, sequestered between advertisements and with the restrictions of low fidelity and family-friendly TV formatting. Alternatively, by the 1980s, anime was swiftly moving into the theatrical domain. Multi-hour, serious, and intensive animated works. Multi-year-long productions requiring steady upfront cash to greenlight. Ghibli's debut project, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, would premiere the year after Dalos, and returning viewers to my channel know of other such things that I've covered, such as Char's Counterattack. But these two avenues present their own restrictions as well. TV anime had to avoid certain topics, or keep the presentation roughly viewer and advertiser friendly. It also had to fit tight deadlines and required a certain volume of episodes for syndication, to keep viewers coming back week after week. It was also, at that time, restricted by the fidelity of what the modern television could provide. On the other hand, movies, by their nature, were precarious. 1989's Venus Wars struggled at the box office, and this put even longtime Sunrise member Yasuhiko off of purely original animated films, or even original animated works. Wings of Haniamise not paying off in 1987 honestly prevented Gainax from becoming a Ghibli-like studio, not making another film until that failure put them well on the path to Neon Genesis Evangelion. This was the core of why Dallos, but really OVAs, seemed to make sense. They were the middle ground, a form of media which enabled projects to take more risks than TV, but maybe not as much as full films. Further, it could be a kind of exclusive high-end luxury. To see a movie once could roughly cost around, adjusted for inflation and currency changes, $10 to $15 USD, 2025. But selling individual Laserdiscs could cost anywhere from $50 to $100 American dollars. Not to mention the relatively big, easy entry of TV. And so therein lies the other key advantage. By selling to individuals, not theaters or TV stations, you can also cater to far more niche interests. Like say a 110 episode long space epic I hope to one day do a video on. Also, sorry if you didn't see this coming, the naughty bits. Ranging from the slightly more erotic or gory to outright pornographic and very violent. OVAs could serve all sorts of niches far better, and in higher tentacled quality than ever before. It is here that I introduce the two unfortunate works that would lead to Giant Robo, and the first important person who would make it possible. Specifically, Yasuto Yamaki, who would be the series planner and producer on Giant Robo. Yamaki worked as producer on a plethora of projects, but unfortunately worth mentioning right now, or fortunately for the sake of Giant Robo, it would be none other than the work Urotsuki Doji, known in the West as Legend of the Overfiend. Wait, you mean the one with the tentacles that, yes, that one. You mean the gory, violent, yes, yeah, that one. And the demons that, yes, that one. Listen, we're not getting into it. It's got some extremely lewd elements which are not relevant to today's story. If you know, you know. And if you know, you're probably a deviated prevert who should answer to the Coca-Cola company. If you don't worry. Go play Shin Megami Tensei instead. I mention it mainly because it was on this project that another important person who would be pivotal to Giant Robo was brought on. Masamichi Amano, the person who would give Giant Robo its iconic and grand orchestral score. A score setting it as one of the arguable high points of anime soundtrack quality. Amano may very well to this day be perhaps one of the most talented contemporary Japanese media composers, having created multiple symphonic suites and orchestral pieces, scoring everything from film to anime to TV. Probably his most well-known work, in the West at least, was the soundtrack for the phenomenal Battle Royale. Yes, that one. No, not the Giuseppe Verdi Desiree part, but everything else. Here I should also mention Amano's amazing score is actually at times made out of a ton of pretty legendary classic orchestral film scores. Giant Robo's main theme being likely based on the main theme composed by Maurice Jarre for Is Paris Burning? The epic charge of Issei and Yoshi is clearly based on the 1962's How the West Was Won music by Alfred Newman. The appearance of the Eye of Vogler track is inspired by Jerry Goldsmith's Masada historical epic theme. One I personally stumbled on was the theme of Big Fire being pretty squarely based on the main theme by Bruce Broughton for Tombstone. We got tracks which sound like Bill Conti. We got tracks which sound like James Horner's Searchers theme. Really, it's kinda bonkers. Now here, a lesser person would say, oh, so GR's amazing OST was just Amano ripping off a lot of Western music. But ripping off here is more like an Olympic athlete competing in multiple events, using other athletes' styles, but still winning gold. The sheer range Amano had to exhibit to capture all these various styles, when not writing wholly original pieces, is so impressive that it easily surpasses any notion of plagiarism, and becomes instead some kind of insane tribute mixtape to the greats of Western orchestral film scores from the classical period. It's a level of impressive flexibility which also puts Amano, in my mind, squarely side by side with Yoko Kanno for really just raw skill and the ability to just do any of this. He most likely first met Yamaki on the anime film Odin, Photon Sailor Starlight, but Urutsuki Doji would be the one where Yamaki seems to have locked in his pick. Yamaki had the following to say from the Giant Robo, the animation, 30th anniversary book. Yamaki: "This is something I've believed in since working on Urutsuki Doji. The value of work that makes you want to watch it repeatedly lies in how well the visuals and music match to create a pleasant experience. Since video anime is a software product that costs nearly 10,000 yen, people watch it repeatedly. That's why I focused on that aspect. There had never been an anime work where the music was so seamlessly integrated. At the time I thought, this has changed the Japanese soundtrack scene. The choice to go with Amano's orchestration, though, was motivated both from a quality and mixing standpoint." Yamaki: "When Nishizaki and I went to Cannes to submit Urutsuki Doji to the Cannes Film Festival," and yeah, you heard that part right, I honestly did a double take the first time I read it. "We saw many of the films that were submitted, and Nishizaki said, good films use live orchestras for their music. Of course, there are good works that use synthesizers, but after 10 to 20 years, the sound may feel outdated. For example, Star Wars uses a full orchestra, so even after decades, it doesn't feel outdated. I thought, since we've gone to such great lengths to create amazing visuals for Giant Robo, if the music doesn't match that, the quality of the work will significantly decrease." Amano's involvement also stems from his work on Urutsuki Doji. Well, Urutsuki Doji also incorporated some live orchestra, actual performances. Amano is essentially one of the pioneers of synthesizers in Japan. However, since sound effects were also created using synthesizer sounds, there were some times when they overlapped with the music. The sound effects team would occasionally mention it would be better if we used the live orchestra. Perhaps the most notable and interesting thing being that said soundtrack was recorded with a full orchestra, but where? Why, the home of anime! As we all know, Warsaw, Poland. Yep, as Yamaki mentions from the same interview. Yamaki: "Shortly before joining Robo, there was a plan to establish an animation studio in Poland. I visited the country. Although the studio plan itself was cancelled, I happened to see the Warsaw Philharmonic Hall, Warsaw National Philharmonic Orchestra, during my visit. So I jokingly mentioned to our employee, who was coordinating in Poland at the time, maybe we could use the Warsaw Philharmonic. At that time, it was the era of the very strong yen, with $1 equaling 80 yen. I found out that it could be done for about half the cost of recording a full orchestra in Japan. The Warsaw Philharmonic was also in a situation where they needed to earn money, in a capitalist manner, due to the influence of perestroika. That's how we were able to make the request. To say the Giant Robo OST is amazing is a vast understatement. It's an acoustic work on par with the best Hollywood outputs, capable of that kind of depth of quality and sound, that emotions and vibrant passion seem to just burst out, even without the visuals. It really is superb. You'll be hearing it and some of Amano's other efforts throughout this video, and I encourage you to listen to his whole catalog. Of course, I said there were 2 works of the OVA landscape which led to GR. So what is the other that arguably contributed to its visuals? Why, it's none less than Space Battleship Yamato. Argenbolt which Yamato? Excellent question. To answer, let me return to Yamaki once more, revealing as well the nature of the unfortunate fate which befell the work in question, but which led to Giant Robo. Interviewer: why did you decide to do a robot story as an alternative to Yamato? Yamaki: at the time, when it came to mecha, robot stories were still in the mainstream. Another reason was the impact of Super Dimension Fortress Macross, Do You Remember Love? That movie was released while I was working on Odin, Foden Sailor Starlight, and I was blown away by the intricate details, timing, and movement of the effects. Compared to the projects we were creating with veteran staff, it was filled with a newness I had never seen before. The professional staff, who were called veterans, were putting in an incredible amount of effort compared to the work they were doing, within their salary range. To be honest, I thought, amateurs are scary. I realized that the younger generation who grew up watching tokusatsu and manga entered the anime industry influenced by Yamato, and incredible talent has emerged. After seeing that film, I felt a desire to create something younger and more vibrant, something no one had ever seen before, especially in the robot genre. So, interestingly, much like the conditions which enhanced Zeta Gundam's production, Giant Robo would be forged from similar stuff. A young anime generation putting their all into this project. However, obviously enough for Giant Robo to succeed, Yamato's late 80s project had to fall through. Originally, I was working as the chief assistant to Nishizaki Yoshinobu of West Cape Corporation, but after Space Battleship Yamato Final Saga, we decided to create a spin-off titled Desler's War. At that time, we reached out to many prominent figures in the anime industry, and one of them was Yasuhiro Imagawa. A few years earlier, I had seen the 37th episode of Or a Battler Dunbine, titled Hyper Gerald, which he had worked on as a storyboard artist and director, and I remembered his name thinking, this is amazing. Even though the script wasn't ready yet, Imagawa had already drawn around 50 to 100 pages of storyboards for Desler's War, and the quality was excellent. In the end, the project didn't materialize and was shelved, but since we had already approached many talented staff members, I thought it would be a shame to just leave it at that. So I came up with the idea for Giant Robo, which is also an efficient way of introducing perhaps the critical link who made GR a reality, Yasuhiro Imagawa. Now, Imagawa is someone who many may recognize from his responsibility as creator and showrunner of none less than the Mobile Fighter G Gundam, a work for another time. But his career intertwined with mecha was actually a long time coming. He had done storyboard work on Fang of the Sun Dogram, that and episode direction on both Or a Battler Dunbine and Heavy Metal L Game. For returning viewers, you may recall from my Zeta video, he actually storyboarded the very eye-catching and stylish Zeta Gundam opening in particular. Around the time when the planning for GR project began, he was working on a series such as Pro Golfer Saru and Mr. Ajiko, a cooking anime, but still giving it his all. Another familiar name for those who have seen my Big O video arrives here. Storyboard and episode director Kazuyoshi Katayama, one of the big 3 behind that later project. From the same 30th anniversary book. Interviewer: first of all, please tell us how you got involved in this series. Katayama: I met the director, Imagawa, through the series Mr. Ajiko, and we hit it off. Interviewer: Was Ajiko the first time you worked with director Imagawa? Kariyama. Yes, it was. Before that, I had only just missed him. When Imagawa was working on Pro Golfer Saru at Studio Dean, I was working on Maison Ikoku in the next room. When Pro Golfer Saru started broadcasting on the TV in the studio, everyone was watching Imagawa's episode in convulsions of laughter. But the story was serious. I was impressed that there was such a way of presenting it. Ajiko is also a gourmet anime, but it is presented in a way similar to Sunrise's robot action works with the cooking showdowns. So I felt that, no matter how outlandish the plot is, if you make a serious drama, the viewers will follow you. So when Ajiko ended, Imagawa told me, "Next time I'm a director, please be my assistant director." In fact, after that, I helped with one TV series project. But that project fell apart midway. After a while, I was asked to participate from the scenario stage for the upcoming Giant Robo animation. To further expand on its origins, no one is perhaps better than Imagawa himself from complete recording of Giant Robo the animation, The Earth Stood Still. Imagawa. It was a commission from producer Yamaki. At the time, I was working on directing episodes of Pro Golfer Saru, and Yamaki approached me about directing Dessler's War. However, the Dessler's War project itself wasn't progressing smoothly. So since it wasn't moving forward, we decided to work on another project, and that's how Giant Robo came about. Interviewer. Was it Yamaki who suggested Giant Robo? Imagawa. The 3 criteria were giant robot story, emotional, and the title must be Giant Robo. I myself had no particular attachment to the title Giant Robo. Now that isn't to say Imagawa was by any means a hired gun for this project. As he himself says from further on in the same interview, Interviewer. You've been a fan of Yokoyama's work since you were a child, right? Imagawa. I've pretty much been a Yokoyama fan since I exited the womb. In truth, while Yamaki had wanted to do this project in or around roughly, as far as I can tell, 1988 or perhaps 89, it would take until the early 90s to find the funding, and more importantly, to find someone like Imagawa. Interviewer. How long did it take from conceiving the idea to actually getting started? Yamaki. First, it was shelved for about 3 years due to budget constraints. Even if it were to produce it as an OVA, each episode was estimated to cost over 50 million yen, so it was difficult to find an investor. I was even asked, why do you want to make a work that costs so much? But for me, I just want to make what I want to make, and I just want to make something interesting. Whether it's a movie or any other form of creation, if the producer, director, or screenwriter doesn't have a passion to create something interesting, that passion won't spread to the staff, and they won't be able to break through the barriers of old traditions. If that passion doesn't spread, you can't create a good work. Once it all came together though, Imagawa was pretty much the first name on the list to make the GR project a reality. Interviewer. So was director Imagawa the first staff member decided on for this project? Yamaki. Yes. I didn't know it when I asked him, but he was also a big fan of Yokoyama Mitsutero's works. When I told him we were doing Giant Robo, he was surprised and asked, how did you know I'm a fan of Yokoyama Mitsutero? He knew more about Yokoyama Mitsutero's works than I did, and introduced me to works I didn't know. Now because of Giant Robo's OVA, I have gone and read quite a number of Mitsutero Yokoyama's works. I think Mr. Yamaki was dead on for his choice of Imagawa. Given the anime landscape at the time, I don't think anyone could have done this story better. Imagawa is very much the man who really created the vision that would become this project, and we will return to him plenty over the sections of this video. But it's worth rounding out a bunch of the other folks who helped make it happen, so let's do that. Those of you who remember my Big O video may also recall Keiichi Sato was present on this project, as an animation supervisor, and as episode director on some of Giant Robo's episodes. It would be, after all, this project where he and Kariyama would cement the ideas for that series. If you want to know more, check out my channel. In particular, he did this very tokusatsu / Ultra 7 light tunnel walking sequence in episode 3. Toshiki Onushi was in charge as a line producer, but his best role in the project I think is really in the material production side. Another member of the previous Yamato Productions, he mentions how quality of animation was a focal point, but also a challenge. Interviewer. Did you have an idea of how far you would go with this project from the very beginning? Onishi. I don't think I thought it would do such a difficult thing, or rather that it would become this difficult. Before this series, Yamaki produced the OVA series, Urutsuki Doji, Legend of the Overfiend. The first trilogy was much talked about because of the elaborate drawings, the number of drawings, and the spectacular scenes that resembled monster films. I heard a rumor that Ano Hideaki was envious. The characters were drawn differently from those in the series, and I didn't think it would be this difficult. When I first saw Daisaku's character sheet, I was secretly excited by the simplicity of the lines, as I had only ever seen such difficult ones. Yamaki also said, "See, it should be easier this time." For the updated character designs, it would fall to Akihiko Yamashita to interpret Yokoyama's style for the project. Yamashita's roles span a pretty vast career covering storyboarding, key animation, and character design on such works as Ghibli's Howl's Moving Castle and Spirited Away, work on Sailor Moon, and even a bit on Revolutionary Girl Utena. However, relevant to my regular viewers, he was also involved on Big O, the Escaflowne movie, and the second rebuild. He was also involved on both Mobile Suit Gundam Double Zeta and Mobile Suit Gundam The 08th MS Team, whose productions overlapped with Giant Robos. However, feeling that, Yamashita. Before and after that, I participated in robot animations such as Blue Comet SPT Leisner and Mobile Suit Gundam Double Zeta, but I didn't find their animation expressions very interesting. Relevant to those viewers of my Zeta video, Yamashita was enticed to work on the project by fellow Studio Biba member Hidetoshi Omori, who likely met Imagawa during Heavy Metal L Games production. From the 30th anniversary book. Interviewer: when did you first learn of this project? Yamashita: it was around the time when I was working on Pro Golfer Saru at Studio Pack, before I joined Mu Film. I was sitting next to Omori Hidetoshi, a senior colleague of mine, who was drawing concept art for a proposal for this series. I couldn't even imagine that I would later be involved in this project, so I looked at it and said, "That's so cool," as if that was someone else's business. One of the pictures Omori was drawing at the time was a concept art showing the boy Daisaku riding inside the eye of a broken Robo. I never thought I would be drawing that scene 10 years later. Unfortunately, Omori ended up leaving the project, but Yamashita stepped up and was enthusiastic to adapt Yokoyama's classic style and working with Imagawa. Interviewer: how is the process of refining nostalgic characters from an old work? Yamashita: for my generation, it felt fresh rather than nostalgic. At the time, there were many people around me who were more inclined towards realism, but I wanted to draw characters that were more cartoonish. Interviewer: how did you go about the design? Yamashita: Imagawa is a fan of Yokoyama Mitsutero, so he specified a drawing from the original manga and asked me to draw this character. Although the name may be changed, I was not familiar with Yokoyama Mitsutero's manga. It was only after I started drawing that I began to understand the appeal of the characters. Perhaps it was because I was not familiar with the works of Yokoyama Mitsutero that I felt a freshness when drawing them. I focused on how to draw the characters simply and did not rely on shape, but was conscious of the modern style of the time. Interviewer: the silhouettes of the characters in Giant Robo are distinctive. Yamashita: it is a key point that is typical of Yokoyama Mitsutero, and I like it too. Dr. Shizuma's crab-like hairstyle is also a strong silhouette, but it doesn't look out of place in animation. There may not be many characters like that, then or now. As one more name very much worth mentioning, for the mechanical style of Giant Robo would fall to Makoto Kobayashi, who I did a video on a few years back, to redesign and add new but nostalgic style to the titular Giant Robo from Yokoyama's original work. Yamashita mentions from the same interview. Interviewer: I understand that you are involved in configuring not only the characters, but also the mechanical elements. Yamashita: one task was to create a character chart, sete, based on the original designs by Kobayashi Makoto, in order to animate them. Kobayashi's concept designs were mainly in the form of color illustrations, which were then turned into model sheets. To make it into animation means to turn Kobayashi's drawings into cells. But since there are no special effects, it is impossible to reproduce the texture of that style. There are inevitably limits to what can be done. We have to capture the weight and texture as a form in animated lines. That's why I tried to express them by moving them slowly and contrasting them with their surroundings. I am of the generation that loves monster tokusatsu, so I also wanted to show the enormous Robo from a human perspective. Karayama Kazuyoshi is also a fan of tokusatsu, so he had a very good way of presenting it, which also firmly links Giant Robo and the Big O as prime heavyweight mecha as I talked about in the past. But largely, now you should have a good idea of the animation production side and its music. But before moving on, it's worth mentioning the voice actors of Giant Robo. The cast here really matches, I feel, the spared no expense approach of GR's visuals and music. A supremely talented voice cast with no dull or bad performances, made of some serious veteran voice actors with professional chops. As Imagawa notes from the complete recording book. Imagawa. But the truth is, when it comes to Giant Robo, the original work was created by someone like Yokoyama, who has a wealth of life experience. The basic premise of this project was to see what would happen if we revived the profound characters created by such a person, using today's advanced techniques. To make the most of that solid foundation, we needed actors who could match. I really wanted veterans who have accumulated experience in various fields and absorbed a lot of things to portray them. I think this is a very basic approach. We aim to create an animation that's not only visually interesting, but also enjoyable to listen to. Interviewer. It's truly a lineup of veterans, but they're familiar faces from foreign films, aren't they? Imagawa. Yes, they're very familiar in old Western films. So I said, Giant Robo aims to be a belles lettres, and these actors have experience performing literature in old Western film dubs. Of course, they also do animation, and on the other hand, they've performed in classic masterpieces. In that sense, I think they all have a very broad range of experience. Even the smallest line has meaning, and they all nail it. Yamaguchi Kappei would play the titular Daisaku Kusama, debuting as the titular Ranma of Ranma 1/2, as well as that of none other than Shinichi Kudo. Yes, Konanne of detective fame, and having a now long career. His credits include the dub voices of Kyle in South Park, to Betterman, as well as, Teddy from Persona 4. From Complete Recording of Giant Robo, the animation book. Kappei. My encounter with Robo was 5 years ago, or rather 6 years ago by the time this book comes out, when I saw a rough sketch of him in the New Year's card I received from director Imagawa. At the time, I never dreamed I'd get to play Daisaku, and I simply gazed at the New Year's card, which said, "This is what we're doing this year," and thought, "That's so cool." Although the voice recording was done at a slow pace of 1 or 2 episodes a year, during that time, no matter what happened, I could encourage myself by thinking, I have Robo. I truly believe that each and every one of those episodes became an invaluable asset for the actor Yamaguchi Kappei. Over the past 5 years, I was able to fully commit myself to this role, borrowing the wisdom of many senior colleagues, and I think that alongside Daisaku, I too have grown little by little. For the main female lead, it would fall to Shimamoto Sumi, none other than Nausicaa herself from that previously mentioned Ghibli movie, but also Miyazaki's prototype redhead princess of Clarice from Lupin III's Castle of Cagliostro. In both the DVD commentary and her interview, she mentions her favorite characters. Sumi. I'd like to say thank you for your hard work to all the staff and cast, but is it wrong to hope for more episodes? After all, I want to see more of my favorite characters, Taiso and Tetsugu, and I think it's a shame that the Magnificent 10 only had so much screen time. If the video becomes a big hit, they may consider it, so let's all do our best. For the antagonist of Genya, the late Shinji Ogawa was cast. He is the first of a running theme in Giant Robo, that of using professional movie dub voice actors. Ogawa was the Japanese dub voice for actors such as Timothy Dalton, and was Chief Fukushima in Patlabor, and had roles in Last Exile and Gundam Unicorn. Ogawa. At first, when I was cast as Genya, I wondered if I could play such a young character at my age, but there were many aspects of Genya that I could really relate to. At first, I thought he was just a villain, but as the episodes progressed, I came to understand more and more. An interesting recurring role noted by Kappei and Sumi during the Episode 1 DVD commentary was that of Koichi Chiba, who voiced the narrator on the original Giant Robo and would this time play the voice of Professor Franken von Vogler. The always amazing Norio Wakamoto plays the heroic Taiso, the voice of Cell, Zemnis, Alan Brady from Dunbine, Guilty Gear's Johnny, and so many more, as well as Hello Evrinyan, I wish I were a bird. The Taoist priest Issei was voiced by Takeshi Ono, the Japanese dub of the Colonel of Metal Gear fame, as well as King Piccolo, and the original Yamato's Shiro Sanada. Yoshi, his giant blue lady backup, was voiced by Kazue Komiya, who had many roles in works such as Char's Counterattack and Urusei Yatsura. To mention just a few more, Chief Chujo of the IPO was voiced by Iemasa Kayumi, Guilty Gear's own Slayer, cementing the overlap, as well as Father in Fullmetal Alchemist, and the Japanese dub voice of Kill Bill's, Bill. Tetsugu, Taiso's brother-in-arms, is voiced by Shozo Itsuka, Get a Robo's own Benkei, as well as 0079's lovable big Hispanic Ryu Jose. Not to mention as well as Nappa, and the iconic Japanese dub for Dr. Jumba of Lilo and Stitch. Professor Go was voiced by Masashi Ibara, Naruto's Might Guy, as well as Dragon Ball's Mr. Satan. Also, Ace Combat 3's Dijin, and the Japanese dub for Voldemort. Ivan of Big Fire, as well as the amazing Fitzcarraldo, was performed by Yasuyoshi Hara, the dub voice of Special Agent Dale Cooper, Kyle MacLachlan. And to cap it off, Yosuke Akimoto would play the unreasonably cool Shockwave Alberto, with a massive number of roles including everything from shows such as Outlaw Star, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Lupin III, Monster, to video games such as Judge Bergen and FF12, Armored Core Verdict Day, and Shin Megami Tensei V's Beelzebub. Of course, he also plays G Gundam's legendary announcer Stalker, and The East is Burning Red, Master Asia. For all the VA leads and much of the cast, you can feel a kind of enthusiasm in just how much they felt they were involved on something seriously, cool. A true passion project, a thing created out of love and ambition to achieve a unique story. Unlike what really existed at the time, to pay tribute to Mitsutaro Yokoyama. Many things had to fall into place to make GR possible. Overfiend had to do, Yamato's follow-up project had to fall through. The Japanese booming yen and the fall of the Berlin Wall, Argenbolt mentioned it again, enabled a caliber of orchestral score still rare to this day in anime. The aim to push OVA animation to its limits of quality and production value. Yamaki had to decide it was worthwhile to shift to Giant Robo as a project when the time was right, and the funding came through. Importantly, perhaps most of all, Imagawa had to show his skill on many previous works, show his passion for the works of Yokoyama, to even make GR into what it became. For many years, I felt after watching it that Giant Robo the animation was a kind of pivotal pillar of what anime could be. A high water mark, a true artistic masterpiece. But at many points it almost didn't happen. Many 90s OVAs never got finished. Many have great animation or music, but are held back by other weaknesses such as narrative. The Giant Robo was special. It succeeded. The reason it did is because of what made it special, enabled by all the efforts of those I've just mentioned. Now, at last, we can turn to what it produced. Imagawa's Dream, the first episode releasing on July 23, 1992, Giant Robo, The Day the Earth Stood Still. The blackness of space is broken through by the dawning of the sun. As in 2001 A Space Odyssey and Gundam, the sunrise signals the future we are about to see. As the opening Avant title shows us, it is a landscape of amazing super science. Huge futuristic zeppelins and bullet trains, sleek cars, trucks, and so on. It is intercut with evil villains of the shadowy Big Fire organization, and the heroes of the International Police Organization. Between them, the foundational designs of strange and powerful giant robots. It is the future from 30 years before Giant Robo the animation. A future now 60 years ago from our perspective. It is the future of Mitsutaro Yokoyama. Born now 90 years ago in 1943 in Kobe, Japan, in a section of the now massive Osaka Bay City area, he lived through World War II, and as I mentioned in my Rebirth of Mecha episode on the 1-to-1 Gundam, saw the American bombers fly overhead. After the war, he came of age as Japan was struggling and then thriving in rebuilding itself. working various jobs to support his manga career, the work which would help catapult him to renown was the one also most important to our story today. In 1956, the creation of Tetsujin 28 Go. The Go in Japanese signaling it as the 28th robot created by the brilliant Dr. Kaneda, who entrusts it to his son, Shotaro. In doing so, Yokoyama in essence canonized and cemented the absolute foundation of the now vast anime world of the genre I, and likely you, dear viewer, love: mecha. The young boy, the powerful humanoid robot, the machine as an ally of justice, the robot as the paternal link between father and son. The success of Tetsujin pushed it to get an anime adaptation, coming to America as Gigantor, in essence also serving as the true birth and exposure through TV to Western audiences as well. What would later see the lineage of Macross, Voltron, and eventually Gundam Wing fall into. But beyond even just Tetsujin, Yokoyama was truly a prolific powerhouse of a mangaka. Following its success, Yokoyama would pen other works with many similar elements. The darker tone of Mars, in which the young boy is also given superpowers, and is charged with judging humankind to be worthy of living or being annihilated as a whole. Babel 2, which would see not just a giant robot, but the huge Rupros and the shape-changing Rodan. Those who would make appearances inspiring modern works like Devil May Cry. It would also get an OVA of its own in 1992, which I think was essentially completely overshadowed by Giant Robo in retrospect. And of course, the one most important to us today, the original Giant Robo. The iconic pharaoh-headed giant robot created by an evil organization for world domination. Daisaku, who takes control of Robo. This is the raw creative ore Imagawa would take and refine, reforging its steel into the shape of Giant Robo the day the Earth stood still. Many, if not almost all, the most iconic giant robots of Yokoyama make cameos in the same opening we just witnessed. Tetsujin's villainous Black Ox, Mars' Titan, and all-powerful Golden Gaia, who caps off the intro, as well as Giant Robo's aquatic GR2, and the only appearance of the flying GR3. When Gainax made sure to have Gunbuster have round arms and legs, they were calling back to this. Those familiar with Getter Robo, or even Gundam's trinity of machines, or the Big O's Big O, Big Duo, and Big Fow, will start to realize just how much is traceable back to Yokoyama. But perhaps the other obvious aspect of the world of Giant Robo is this futurism. The forms of the robots, but also machines, computers, trains, airplanes, and so on, is framed with an intentional and stylish nostalgia. As Evangelion and the Big O did, the effort was to do something driven by a deep love and passion, a celebration of nostalgia, let's bring to life the stories that we loved in our youth with the highest possible quality we can. All around are visual examples of this. The train, which appears in episode 1, is none other than a streamlined Art Deco locomotive from the 1930s. The huge, equally Art Deco transport zeppelin, used by the protagonists, is named Greta Garbo, after the famous silent movie actress. This has led some very misguided souls to try and say Giant Robo is a steampunk work. But terrible descriptions aside, it isn't really trying to be one particular era, so much as capture an open-ended spirit of the kinds of futurism Yokoyama put into his stories. A kind of non-specific future yet to be. Even the fact most of the story takes place in China is fascinating. While Japan's rapid reconstruction was Yokoyama's original inspiration, China as well has almost shockingly transformed in the last 50 years. Spurred by no shortage of its own technological and industrial advancement. As Imagawa says from the complete recording. Interviewer: why did you choose China as the setting? Imagawa: it wasn't just because it was China. I wanted to set the story in a mysterious world with an implausible near-future setting and a stateless city. I wanted to create a world with an unstable impression in Giant Robo. Plus, I love Hong Kong. It's such a vibrant city, isn't it? It feels like a borderless, open-minded place where nationality doesn't matter. The market scene in the second episode, where Yoshi and the others jump over it, really captures that atmosphere, and I love it. Also, I always keep in mind the concept of unbalanced balance. In the first episode, wasn't there a scene where the bullet train was racing through the mountains, and as it emerges from the tunnel, suddenly it's a futuristic world. The streets of Nanjing spread out before them. That's also part of that idea. By adding futuristic elements to antiquated settings, the flow of modernization becomes more evident. A world of super scientists, good and evil, of evil organizations and leagues of heroes. A world of robots, cool vehicles, and machines. Everything down to helicopters and forklifts to lighters and computers. Even this greater spirit of old visions of the future, of the miraculous technologies it may yet bring forth. It is a good time now to note something else, namely that obviously this OVA isn't really an exact telling of Yokoyama's manga original. This was in fact already adapted, with the tokusatsu version of Giant Robo, which itself, ironically enough, was brought to the USA as Johnny Socko and his Flying Robot in 1969, meaning there is a very currently possible guy approaching around 70 years of age who could have watched both Tetsujin and Giant Robo's American syndications, in essence being the first American-Japanese mecha fan. Now, I won't speak too much on it further, as, while helping to inspire mecha works, it isn't the main inspiration for this OVA, as much as the original Collective Yokoyama's collection was. Imagawa was asked pretty directly about this in the Complete Record interview. Interviewer: so you didn't pay much attention to the original story. Imagawa: there was one thing from the original manga that I wanted to include. The scene where the BF group forms a circle, raises their hands, and says, "For Big Fire." I thought that kind of coolness is rare these days. I wanted to create an organization that could pull that off. Another consistent element in both the original and the live-action version is the connection between Robo and Daisaku through the wristwatch. I felt that was absolutely essential. However, since we were creating an original anime, I did feel like we were distancing ourselves from the manga as much as possible. My approach when adapting an original work into an anime is to figure out how to translate the essence of the original into the world of film. From there, I remove or alter unnecessary elements, while expanding on necessary ones. In that way, I think it's important not to cling too strictly to the original. Now, I can't say it is for everyone, but if you are, like myself, and delight in seeing and enjoying these kinds of time capsules, it really is top shelf. Even if, ironically, this means I feel a warm nostalgia for a work 30 years old, which, is basically built out of nostalgia for Yokoyama's works 30 years previous. Much like the Big O, it's an amazing picture frame for a photo of the future of the past. That makes really the whole of Giant Robo then an excellent case example in hauntology, a now very popular and fascinating field of, in essence, looking at these cybernetic ghosts of the future of the past. Of modern Gen Z or Alpha adoring 80s city pop, for example, or the kind of foreign nostalgic indulgence of the Russian half of the space race. But something else surprised me from the translated interviews, from the 30th anniversary book. Katayama. When it came time to decide on the story in earnest, Imagawa and I had a scenario camp. We took a room at a famous inn in Kageruzaka, where people in the movie industry often stay and hold up for a day. It was a boarding house in which I would propose ideas and directions for the series according to the story Imagawa had in mind. At that time, Imagawa mentioned the idea of combining 2 episodes, Doomsday is Tomorrow, a 2-parter from the Bionic Woman show, and Voyager's Return from Space 1999. If you've seen the originals, you may be able to see how these elements are utilized in Giant Robo. Since we were in such a good mood, the story-making process ended early. We started drinking in the latter half of the day, and in the evening we were strolling drunk through the streets of Kageruzaka. After nightfall, the director worked hard on the plot to concoct an alibi for his work, and I was drawing concept art next to him. Yep, you heard that right. As is so often the case, being a nerd is an international kind of mental state. This means as well that, like its siblings, Evangelion and The Big O, Giant Robo is one crafted out of broader science fiction landscapes and nostalgia for it, absolutely including Western works. As a tangential case backing up that point, it was Imagawa's obsession with Twin Peaks in particular which motivated several voice actor choices. However, midway through production, Imagawa got into the then recently dubbed Star Trek The Next Generation. causing many of the voice actors to pop up in Giant Robo's later episodes. Of course, perhaps the biggest reference has been in front of us the entire time. The Day the Earth Stood Still, the hugely successful and popular 1951 science fiction movie. This black and white classic featuring an alien who comes to Earth to demand humankind renounce their violent nature. It also features his giant aluminum bodyguard, Gort, who would inspire quite a bit, including Earthbound starmen. But speaking of that, I think it's now worth it to mention that central plot and characters in a bit more detail. We join a grand story very much in the middle of everything, seeing the experts of justice from the IPO's Peking branch as they meet Daisaku Kusama and his giant guardian, Giant Robo. The item which draws them into the conflict with the powerful villains of the Big Fire organization is the attaché case, within which is an incredible device and the central axis of our story, the Shizuma Drive, a miraculous energy source, non-polluting and totally recyclable. It is the very icon which that same intro lingers on, forming from the dawning sun. A device shown to power everything: cities, vehicles, appliances big and small. The very notion of it is so pure, so concentrated an idea from the annals of classic science fiction, or, more broadly, modern science and technology. As I write this, the quest for an energy-efficient fusion power is still ongoing. In Yokoyama's time of the 50s and 60s, the obvious parallel was nuclear fission. Thus we also quickly see the villain's motivation and conflict behind the story. The scientists who invented it have been hunted down and killed. Now the mad scientist who helped develop it has returned, Franken von Vogler. Professor Shizuma, namesake creator of the drive and only surviving member, is the target of Vogler's plot. In his possession is a mysterious sample. In the pursuit of the creation of this miraculous device, it struggled. So, in a bid to complete a working prototype, a terrible accident was set in motion. Bashtarl, a country, the site of the Shizuma Drive test research reactor, was overloaded, and the ensuing cataclysm devastated the entire nation and the entire globe. In modern times, then, Paris is ruined by catastrophe, and from this catastrophe emerges the ultimate form of Vogler's seeming revenge. The colossal black sphere, the Eye of Vogler, based on a design from Yokoyama's Mars. Within are set the anti-Shizuma drives, whose radiated power can shut down and negate the entire world's Shizuma-based energy grid. This means that every form of electricity is essentially now in jeopardy. The plan is held back by only one issue. Only 2 of the 3 anti-Shizuma drives are in possession of the mysterious villain Genya. The third, and final, was whisked away by Professor Shizuma. With the forces of Big Fire in hot pursuit, of Big Fire's Magnificent 10, Shockwave Alberto and Ivan the Terrible pursue, aided by the mysterious masked warrior Ko and Shaku, and Ivan's powerful robot Uranus. Daisaku Kusama and Giant Robo come to the aid of Professor Shizuma, and to aid Daisaku so do the experts of Peking. Ginrei, Taiso, Tetsugyu, Yoshi, and the Taoist priest, Issei, along with Professor Go and their leader of the branch, Chief Chujo. But all along, a terrible and secret past has been hinted at for Ginrei and Professor Go. Really, had Giant Robo not been completed, these first few episodes alone would function as an incredible work. Thankfully, there is more, but I feel episodes 1 to 3, or 1 to 4, serve as the still notable outline of perhaps the original plot. The second half really being the magnetic net operation. As Katayama and Yamashita note themselves in the commentary tracks, the entire thing flows like a kaiju movie. With the threat approaching and the destroying of the city, the counter-action plan is attempted. A scientific solution to beat the sphere of Vogler. The heroes of the story attempt to use the electromagnetic net to cast it into space. I mention this not just to summarize, because this too flows as a kind of science fiction nostalgia and tribute. From the original Godzilla's oxygen destroyer plot, to Shin Godzilla's coolant plan, to the recent Godzilla -1's pressure shock operation. It's another piece of shared DNA with Evangelion, and even seemingly unrelated Western works like Alien or the original The Thing. They all echo this shared lineage back to the SF films of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. To counteract the evil confronting us, perhaps one born of misused science, we must in turn apply science of our own to execute the world-saving operation. It is a nostalgic story format which lets many individual characters get moments and struggles, and which, going by those recent Godzilla films at least, is still pretty compelling as a framework for storytelling. Now, I really can't close out this section without taking the opportunity to at least mention the central embodiment of that: Giant Robo itself. Makoto Kobayashi's redesign. Eschewing the humanoid proportions of the original, he massively exaggerated Robo's proportions and general features, in the process creating one of the toughest, biggest brick friggin' house designs in mecha. Robo in motion was animated with an intense and impactful kind of mass. It really makes you feel like Giant Robo could give one of those 40k titans a broken jaw with one tough bastard right hook. Robo also, interestingly, lost the fingertip missiles which Gunbuster inherited from the manga original. Instead, all the weapons are held internally, keeping the broad walking iron fortress of a silhouette clean and succinct. As a fun note, Robo's updated face was, at least according to Katayama and Yamashita, based on Arnold Schwarzenegger's in Makoto Kobayashi's scale model that they use as an animation reference. This means, weirdly enough, that Giant Robo's jawline visually actually shares some DNA with the Terminator. Relating to that, Imagawa has this interesting bit about Giant Robo's approach as well. For the titular machine, from the VMAX Volume 2 interview, Imagawa: "You have to rethink what a robot is. Robots, classical robots, are not supposed to be like Gundam. No matter how cool the mechanical design is, in Gundam, it's not a robot anymore. It's a mobile suit. And also, any other shows which are just an extension of Gundam. You must come up with new ideas, new designs for the robot that people haven't seen before, and tell people your view of what a robot is." Here, I think Imagawa is making a strong case about how Robo is both a new design, but also an appeal to the classical concept of the giant robot. Not a vehicle or suit of armor, but as a commandable giant iron golem. But not to go on too much about just Robo, pretty much all of the updated designs for the machines of the world are great. The very Shikaki Dogu version of Uranus, or the electromagnetic wire net projectors, looking like a kind of a weird cross between a World War II acoustic plane detection thing and, I don't know, your Chinese uncle's soju brewing jars. Kobayashi's GR2 as well, as the redesign of Mars's Poseidon into GR's Neptune, all look great. As someone who was trying to bring back Yokoyama's style around the time he worked on Char's Counterattack, Hideaki Anno contributed a drawing of Black Ox to one Giant Robo fan magazine, which should hopefully prove some of his own enjoyment of this series. Like the characters and world, it's a supremely well-expressed throwback to Yokoyama's style. This is a fully majored part of Giant Robo's appeal. But those familiar with the story may know a dark secret is lurking right around the corner for this futurism and its celebration of technology. As we now know, unlike those 60 years ago, a terrible cost was imposed on our embracing of these seeming miracles. The Middle Ages gave way to the so-called Enlightenment, and from it was born an age of connection, the soul of which was the Industrial Revolution, from which came forth the ideas and philosophy of modernism. That technology and competition would provide the plenty humankind hungered for. The tenets of modernism were really the following: that the world was a rational, empirical hierarchy of races, religions, and empires, that to dominate and provide the resources needed would in turn provide the plenty of the nation. And at the core, all of this was made possible by the betterment of technology, learning, and machines. For those alive now with some knowledge of history watching this, I don't think it's a controversial notion to say the first two tenets, to any moral modern human, were irrevocably proven false by the events of the 20th century. Take your pick of either World War I or II, Vietnam, or the mechanical genocides and horrors of colonialism, or so on. In the name of resources and hierarchy, some of history's greatest evils have been committed. But the third tenet has lived on: the wonder and novelty of new technology. It is alive in all of Musk's tainted projects, in the wonders of AI or fusion power, or even just broadly robots or drones. Despite the now very obvious costs. On the surface, Giant Robo is a kind of indulgence in this. the nostalgic celebration of an age wrapped in the wonders of rapid technological progress, in the appealing tautological ghost of modernism. But if that were the case, I would like, but not love, this work. No. Within the tribute to Yokoyama's futures lies Imagawa's grappling with its dire cost, and more importantly, the beautiful night. However, we are not yet ready to get into that, because the other half of Giant Robo and Yokoyama's identity has been sitting in front of us the whole time. Like, look, that guy just jumped 30 meters in the air. Issei was using the masterful Dao to conjure illusions and shapeshift. Shocking Alberto does like an insane spin attack, and Taiso is a friggin' living battery of electricity. Why are these people dressed like this? What is this weird mountain location? And who the hell is the unkillable bastard, Ko and Shaku? Amongst the epic classics of the eon-spanning tradition of Chinese literature, two works in particular stand tall for our purposes today. The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, set during the difficult and tumultuous Three Kingdoms period, when the collapse of the Han Dynasty led to lifetimes of conflict. It has a frankly immense cast of characters and scale unseen in many Western historical works. It was brought to life in two massive TV projects. One from the 90s, which is more dramatic, and I am told at least, the favorite of elder Chinese viewers, and a 2010 rendition more desaturated and also my first humble foray into that story. The second work in question is that of the equally vast in scale Water Margin, known also as Outlaws of the Swamp, or my favorite and very powerfully, All Men Are Brothers. A very Robin Hood-esque tale of the unsealing of a sacred temple which unleashes 108 spirits into the world. They in turn become, 108 characters, said outlaws, who resist the tyrannical and cruel Grand Marshal among other rebel groups. They gather and hide around Mount Liang, or as it was translated into Japanese, Ryozenpaku. I mention these two epics for very good reason. That being, when many people I have shown Giant Robo to watch it, or several reviews of it were made on YouTube, there is a recurring comment which usually pops up and takes the rough form of something like this. Wow, for a work called Giant Robo, it sure does focus a lot on the characters doing fancy Chinese martial arts battles. Indeed, if one were to, like myself, go into this OVA fresh-faced all those years ago and know nothing of its background, it is very easy, once again, as I once did, to come out with this overwhelming feeling of the massive and, put bluntly, really damn cool world it has. Yeah, they have robots and super science, but clearly martial arts heroes and everything from regular wuxia to super ninpo and Taoist magic. However, the reason as to why GR took this form is actually quite simple. It is once again because of Mitsutaro Yokoyama. In addition to all his futuristic works mentioned in the previous section, was also singularly responsible for, at the time, the adaptation of those two stories into manga format that I mentioned before. To say these works were popular and influential is a tremendous understatement. As Pause and Select went over in a more specific detail, it's the cause of Japan's love of Zhuge Liang, and no doubt helped fuel the creation of the massive Dynasty Warrior series of games. So, when it came time for Imagawa to flesh out this project, a project made in tribute to Yokoyama, he took perhaps the most creative and quite frankly insane route possible. Why not use this opportunity to make in essence the Yokoyama Super Crossover Hyper Universe? From the Complete Record interview. Imagawa. What I remember most from my childhood is that when we went back to the countryside, we had to ride the Shinkansen for 2.5 hours. That's really agonizing for a child. So my mother bought me the first volume of Kagemaro of Iga at the station kiosk. There was no other book that got me so excited. I read it over and over again on the Shinkansen. I think that was the formative experience that made me a fan of Yokoyama's work. Another work that left a deep impression on me was The Water Margin. I really like the part where Tetsugu and Taiso go to see Issei Doujin, and I've wanted to see it animated since I was a child. So when I got the request for Giant Robo from Yamaki, the first thing I said was, can we include Taiso and Tetsugu? And he replied, if we get permission from Yokoyama. Interviewer: and so you met with Yokoyama? Imagawa: yes, I went to meet him to get permission. When I said I want to borrow characters from your various works and create an all-star cast, he replied, if it will make it interesting, do as you like. He added, I am a manga artist, not a filmmaker. I try not to interfere with those things I don't understand. That comment was really appreciated. Imagawa essentially had the green light to take all his favorite characters from Yokoyama's various works and basically do as he pleased. But I would be doing you, a dear viewer, a massive disservice if this was the only avenue of Chinese culture which ended up in Giant Robo. As Imagawa previously himself admitted, and the staff regularly note, Imagawa is an avid consumer of Hong Kong culture, and with that I think it's worth noting. Wuxia. This literary tradition is often compared to superheroes, but its origins are quite frankly as ancient and literary as China. Stories of traveling elite martial artists fighting on behalf of good versus evil. More relevant to my point here was the wave which began with the literature of Liang Yuxing and Jin Yong. Through written works such as The Smiling Proud Warrior, whose Dongfeng Bubai was almost certainly the inspiration for G Gundam's Master Asia. Through the films such as The Sword, A Touch of Zen, and Duel to the Death. Among those whose traces I feel most prominently in Giant Robo. Characters leaping through the air, the use of Taoist magic or ninjutsu, of good against evil. It is important to note that these are not the same as general kung fu films, that the name wuxia, to be an armed, chivalrous, honorable, or hero of a sacred code, is more akin in the West to our conception of superheroes. Whereas almost all modern superheroes are born from some kind of super science, to become a follower of Xia is to seek self-cultivation and training. In the place of gamma rays, mutant spiders, being a literal alien, and nuclear power, we have hidden sacred scrolls of advanced techniques, years of Buddhist spiritual growth, and, well, in a few cases, castration to preserve the balance of Qi, Yin, and Yang. And to the credit of Yokoyama, his stories often contain examples of both. The members of Big Fire from Giant Robo, Babel 2, or Mars often show super speed, super strength, leaping buildings with amazing agility, projecting energy, not unlike the heroes of his adaptations of the Chinese classics or Japanese period pieces like Kagemaru. I make note of this for a very simple reason, as you are likely starting to get. While at first seemingly striking a difference, a contrast between humongous scientific robots, vehicles, and technology, and characters wearing ancient Chinese clothing, wielding magic powers or swords, they are in truth something else. It is, quite frankly, in my opinion, the single best marriage of essentially the same thing. The amazing heroes of human history, the amazing advanced future, and the fantastic adventures of the past. It is one of the things which makes Giant Robo so great and so utterly unique. From the VMAX Anime and Manga Volume 2 interview. Imagawa. You create an unbalanced mood by having robots and people with superpowers, people with Chinese clothes and other clothes. Basically, the story is for people to have conflicts and fight, and the purpose of Robo is like a bulldozer for the people who have the conflicts. For his part, Imagawa never really attempted this as hard after Giant Robo, and to my knowledge, very few other anime would do something akin to this, with this quality, ever again. Imagawa's adaptation of Tetsujin 28 in 2003 would play it far more straightly to Yokoyama's original story. There is the Giant Robo manga, no, not the original, the one for this OVA, which does use the leftover ideas, but it's at best a shadow of this work. Really, the closest we have now is the nauseatingly corporate and quite frankly disgusting attempts at, multiverses. A soulless globbing together of familiar brands to keep them in the consumer's mind. Stale, puppeted, unliving things. Quite frankly, disgusting. Okay, well, I lied. just a little bit. The only other work of this specific caliber, pertaining specifically to animation, is actually Who Framed Roger Rabbit, itself one massive high-effort love letter to the animated works of the past, but in the West, and as a smorgasbord of references and crossovers born from a passion to make something great, but with all the techniques and experience and technology of the time. However, it was also created during the same early 90s planetary alignment and eclipse, which we will unfortunately not experience again until the year 2990, sadly. Returning to Giant Robo, you may know and can see how we got this world of fabulous retro-futuristic giant robots, and evil organizations vying for world domination. But also, most characters can zoom at Mach 3, or jump 30 meters from roof to roof, or do that cool thing where, they kind of just blur in, and they're just kind of there, and they do a cool pose, and then they can just when the scene is done, just blur out, just disappear. It's really cool. We can now also return to the mystery of Giant Robo, the big one. Who the heck is Koenshaku? Or more broadly, who are most of these characters? Now, if you are allergic to big autistic lists, I suggest you skip this to this timestamp. But if you are interested, here it is. Do you need to know this to enjoy Giant Robo, the day the Earth stood still? Hell no! Will I get the Chinese name pronunciations right? Hell no. Wow, Argon, you figured it all out on your own, did you? That's impressive. Hell no. I just had to hang around various places, watching people compile it all together. I mean, I got a few of the more obvious ones, like Alberto on my own, but the cast is friggin' filled with niche picks. Who made it possible? Literally everyone you see on screen right now. A ton of Giant Robo fan sites, forum posts, researchers, and various DVD and BR notes. All I'm doing is converting it to video format, so thanks to the people who actually did the hard part. Daisaku Kusama is, he's just Daisaku Kusama from Giant Robo, the manga. Ginrei is based on Ginrei from His Name is 101, a sort of spiritual sequel to Babel 2. Tetsugyu is based on Likui from Water Margin, whose nickname was Iron Ox, hence his Japanese name in GR being Tetsugyu. Taiso is based on Daijang, also from Water Margin, who befriends Likui in that story, hence their brotherly bond being preserved here in Giant Robo. Yoshi, the Blue Beast, was originally a man named Yang-ji in Water Margin. And the reason she was made a woman in GR was probably because the story only has 2 women, including her. Issei, the Taoist priest as well, is Gongsun Sheng from Water Margin, who also is a powerful Taoist mage. Kenji Murasame is based on his namesake from Tetsujin 28, his immortality coming from The Man Who Peeped the Future, an anthology. Professor Go is based on Wu Yong, the scholar, another outlaw from Water Margin, but with a doctorate in military strategy and a minor in teaching. Dr. Shizuma was based on Dr. Dragnet from Tetsujin 28, probably explaining his crab-shaped hair. Chief Jujo was, funnily enough, based on the UN Defense Minister from Babel 2. And, I read Babel 2, and, I don't remember this guy too well. He was kind of just, there. I think Imagawa just thought he looked cool with his sunglasses, which is his main reason for picking a lot of these guys. Oh, and worth noting now, a lot of their honorable titles, Imagawa just made up. Listen, in Water Margin and in Ancient China, there's a bunch of ways you can essentially kind of get a new name. So if you're born Doug Bob, but you're amazing with a bow and arrow, and then you're included as a legendary hero in a book, you get a super cool name Star Blazing Arrow. And it's sometimes just kind of added to your old name, so you kind of just become Doug Bob, the Star Blazing Arrow, as Imagawa mentions from the Complete Record interview. Interviewer: still, the naming is also peculiar and elaborate, like Shockwave. Imagawa: that was my speciality. Some of the names are taken from nicknames in the Water Margin, but even in the stories I came up with in junior high, there were characters with such nicknames like XX of the Southern Sea or XX of the Northern Mountains. After all, there should be aliases. Well, fun names, I guess. I wanted to give them names that would make people wonder, what kind of person is he? Interviewer: I have one question. What's so fabulous about Fitzcarraldo? Imagawa: Everything about him is fabulous, I'm sure. Also, people often ask me, what's so turbulent about Kawasaki? Well, I just enjoy giving them names. I just like that kind of thing. To actually answer that interviewer's question, Fitzcarraldo is probably named after the 1982 Werner Herzog film? The one about dragging a boat through the friggin' Amazon. Yeah, Metalocalypse made a parody of this. Imagawa probably just thought the name sounded cool. Just like how Ginrei's true last name, Farmel von Vogler, well actually the Farmel part, was a famous French singer in the 1920s. Rounding out this list, let's quickly do the important villains as well. Franken von Vogler is based on Shuten Franken from Tetsujin 28. In that series, he created Black Ox, one of the more important antagonist robots, which went on to inspire a certain Black Labor in Patlamar. More importantly, Black Ox had the special ability to emit electricity-nullifying mist, no doubt inspiring what takes place in this OVA. We will be returning to that later, however. Shocking Alberto, or Alberto the Shockwave, or Shockwave Alberto, was one of the bigger mech pilots from Mars, as is his subordinate Ivan, another mech pilot from the same originally. Genya is based on Genya from Kagemaru of Iga. I haven't read this one, and I don't know much of any English translations existing, so I don't have much more here, sadly. Cervantes, the Dazzling, is interestingly based on some really disposable mooks from Babel 2, so another Imagawa finds this guy looks cool moment. Fabulous Fitzcarraldo is also based on a one-off Babel 2 goon. Shokatsu Kome is of course none other than the very well-known Jige Liang himself, from Three Kingdoms fame, resuming his role as master manipulator and strategist, but in a white suit. Red the Mask is Akaga Kage. Yeah, you can laugh. From the Yokoyama work of the same name. As is Sunny the Witch, who is just Sally the Witch, because yes, Yokoyama also did Maho Shoujo series. Doki the Direct is just Doki the Darkness from the manga of the same name. As you can probably guess, Imagawa used the big fire ranks to stuff in a lot of one-off characters. Kawasaki the Turbulent is actually the original pilot of Uranus from Mars. Hanzui is based on Fanri of Water Margin, a mystical hermit, which, fun fact, his coin sword was a novelty souvenir Imagawa got on vacation in Hong Kong. And of course, I couldn't overlook Big Fire himself, who, while incorporating elements of Mars, with his 3 guardians of a giant aquatic robot, a huge pterosaur, and the shape-shifting panther, the one and only babe, Soldier Blue of Towards the Terror. Well, there you have it. Hey, wait, what about Koen Shaku? Oh, right, yeah, he's just like another guy from Water Margin. Huyanjo. He used 2 clubs, which became whips, I think, in the Yokoyama work. Why is he an unkillable force of darkness? It's cool. Imagawa thought he looked cool. Also, his name, Ko and Shaku, is probably some kind of play on Joao's preference for black horses and black war banners. But man, doesn't he look cool. You know, like Darth Vader minus a stupid fucking backstory. So, assuming you didn't just skip to this part, there's a good idea of where everyone came from. Anyone I didn't mention exactly, don't worry, it's another Yokoyama character, probably with a new added cool name, probably based on some kind of pun. I also have to note how many of the staff consistently go, yeah, Alberto is so friggin' cool. Both Ginrei and Daisaku's VA mention this, and Yamashita Akihiko, the main character artist, had this to say. Interviewer, who is your favorite character among them? Akihiko, definitely Alberto. Whenever I'm asked to sign an autograph, I draw Alberto if there's no drawing specified. I drew sketches of Alberto and Ivan. Before, Kuboka and I decided on the division of the characters as I mentioned earlier. The design was different from the one used in the series, but he appreciated the sketches, and I was put in charge of them. I liked Alberto so much at the time that I put lots of effort into the sketches, and it seemed like they decided to leave the older men to me. Adding to that Hong Kong point from earlier, Katayama had this to say. Katayama. However, at the time of the first episode, I was still groping for a sense of what it would be like. For the scene where Alberto lands at the airport, Imagawa's original storyboard had him standing on the plane like he's surfing, and I wasn't sure about it. and opposed to the idea, but then I saw the Hong Kong movie The Wicked City, and saw Nakadai Tatsuya riding on top of the jumbo jet like a surfer. I apologized to Imagawa saying, "Sorry, you were right." Speaking personally, I think Giant Robo single-handedly made me a lifelong fan of guy/girl with insane superpowers who otherwise just wears a black suit. To this day, I find it incredibly friggin' rad. The entire cast as well is kind of notably mature. With the exception of Daisaku and the very brief role of Sunny, there's a total lack of the usual adolescent characters that fill anime. It's mostly just cool older guys of some kind or another. With that established, you can now see probably also why Giant Robo would have the impact it did. In addition to being a superb retro-futuristic giant robot story, it is also a giant superpowered smorgasbord of cool wuxia and historic characters, all lovingly pulled from Yokoyama's vast drawn cast. This is why the headquarters of the IPO, our heroic faction, is none other than the mythical Ryozenpaku, based on the real-life Mount Liang, which is surrounded by, a giant marshland, perfect for outlaws of some kind. Returning to the central story, sadly, due to the intervention of Ivan and Alberto, the electric wire net operation fails. Against higher orders, Tetsugu deploys Giant Robo, whose activation shadow echoes the intro of Tetsujin 28's original animated opening. Thanks to Robo's power, Ivan's Uranus is defeated, but the Eye of Vogler proves too strong. The IPO abandoned Shanghai in a tattered retreat. To cover their escape, Taiso gives his life, holding off Alberto. Alberto seems positively distraught that his heated rivalry with Taiso would end so anticlimactically. Ginrei saves Daisaku, but only by using her most desperate power, teleportation, one which comes at the cost of her life force. Daisaku even manages to summon Robo, preventing an annihilation by the massive Eye of Vogler. However, just as the group manages to escape on the airship Greta Garbo, Ko and Shaku and Genya, the true master of the sphere of Vogler, and the Earth Standstill operation appear. Yoshi, the blue beast, sacrifices herself to detach the escape compartment, just as a terrible truth is revealed. Ginrei is none other than Franken von Vogler's daughter, and Genya, master of the current plan to halt modern civilization, is his son. The other terrible secret is one revealed much earlier, but I mention now. The reason Taiso gave his life was in part the same reason Robo could fight against the Eye of Vogler when all other power grids fell silent. Robo is nuclear powered, unique in a world where the Shizuma drive took all precedence. With these terrible secrets revealed, and our heroes and villains plummeting into the Chinese mountains, it is now time to turn to the first part. The first question. The first major philosophy which underpins the epic work, Giant Robo, The Day the Earth Stood Still. One day, now over 20 years in the past, on a summer afternoon, my father brought home a film, as was often the routine. It was my first Studio Ghibli movie to experience. Lapida, Castle in the Sky. Wonderful images of armored trains, flying machines, cool robots, and adventure. Within the film, however, were two haunting mysteries which kind of stuck with me. The first was the inscribed monument, which I have talked on in the past. But the other, dear viewer, is what I mentioned today. At the climax of that film, Shita, one of the last royal descendants of Lapida, explains her understanding of Lapida's abandonment to Muska, the other heir of Lapida's power. This scene utterly confused me. Lapida, with unassailable defenses, flying in the sky, with a supreme weapon capable of biblical destruction, with an immortal army of guardian robots, beautiful architecture and advanced technology. Why had the creators, the citizens of Lapida, abandoned it? Shita's explanation didn't make any sense to me. As a lover of science fiction from a young age, everyone knew how it would be. The future, machines and computers. like those I played games on as a child. Visions of the future on Discovery Channel in media. Technological progress, flying cars, huge Tokyo pyramids and floating cities. Arcologies, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence. My parents couldn't answer my question, so I did what most do and kept on living life. In time, the ghost of that question would push me to go to its source, to Swift's Gulliver's Travels. The original Lapida in those pages was in its pure form a criticism of England, isolated and advanced by technology, feeling superior, not just in technology alone, but also in Swift's satire, literally superior altitude, in its ego from its progress. The truth, of course, is that Sheeta's words were not mysterious at all. In fact, they were so agonizingly direct I had failed to grasp the simplicity of them, and Swift's Lapida had not helped. Miyazaki's philosophy, to return to agrarianism, to return to the cycles of the earth. In a way, Tolkien's dream as well. But his outright eschewing, appealing as it was incompatible with my way of life. Though my grandparents in their youth, in their old country, grew up in a house which still had dirt floors. Grew up in a time where lives were still determined by the tilling of the fields and the raising of animals. The life I live is one nested within the advancements of society, and that has given it to me. Clean water, air conditioning, electricity, and obviously enough to you, dear viewer, the internet. It was from this personal growth I developed a bit of a philosophy. The Laputian curse, or, more adequately, the Laputian paradox. That each new generation takes for granted the advancements which it is born into, and that without questioning it, the cost and the sacrifices of the path which got us here is never truly understood nor valued. We all in the West are living in and on a kind of Lapida. But I, of course, never would have understood or even come as far as considering these things without another work. The work which, by title of this video, you should now know well. In the 5th episode of Giant Robo, we see the origin of Daisaku and Robo's bond. His father, having worked as a scientist for the evil Big Fire, gives Daisaku the controller wristwatch. As he bleeds to death, his parting words to Daisaku are the line which gives me the missing piece. The question to answer my original question. Can happiness be achieved without sacrifice? Within the larger work, it would be all too easy to treat it merely as a cool phrase. Something poetic, something impactful. But the nature of its meaning is plain to see, if one takes the time to consider it. As his father dies, it is that in the background which comes to life. Giant Robo. Over the last several years, I made many videos. Videos about mecha. About how they work, not just as power fantasies or cool vehicles, but as powerful symbols. Robo's nuclear power, in truth Giant Robo as a whole, is the embodiment of that theme, the philosophy, the question in humanoid form. Japan was the first human nation to be destroyed by nuclear weapons, and, until today, thankfully, has been the last. Yet from the industrial destruction of World War II, Japan rebuilt. Because of that blinding progress, it in turn developed atomic power. This was the supreme industrial irony, the supreme truth Imagawa was trying to question. The prosperity and the happiness of post-war Japan came with the sacrifice of so many in World War II. In many Japanese works, nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, are treated as an ultimate villain, something to be despised, a kind of scientific curse. Godzilla in particular comes to mind as a perfect summation of that vilification. However, Imagawa's and now my philosophy are not so one note. If it was, I don't think I would love this work the way that I do. From the complete record. Imagawa. There's also another theme into this series. It was a year of extreme heat, so much so that it was said that beer sales had never been higher. At the time, there were news reports about nuclear power plants being overloaded and exceeding their maximum permissible capacity. The news said, Everyone please lower your air conditioner temperature by 1 or 2 degrees. That will help. When you're in Tokyo, it's easy to view nuclear power plants as someone else's problem. That's because there aren't any in Tokyo. But what if there was a nuclear power plant right in the middle of Tokyo? That would be terrifying. Then people wouldn't just lower their temperature by 1 or 2 degrees, they'd probably stop using their air conditioners altogether. If they turned on their air conditioners and the nuclear power plant right in front of them started shaking like a washing machine, that would be terrifying, wouldn't it? Since nuclear power plants aren't nearby, we don't think of nuclear issues as something close to us. Of course, we'd be in trouble without nuclear power, but we'd hate it if it were right next to us. That's how I first became aware of the nuclear issues, and that's how the story of Giant Robo began. This relationship. This is the nuclear heart of both Giant Robo, the machine, and Giant Robo, the work, as well as our relationship with technology as a whole. When the consequences of our development, our progress, are far away, in space or time, we grow comfortable and tolerant of them. For those with the curse of Lapida, its paradox, it's entirely possible to never even perceive them at all. We take for granted that we live in our perfect flying cities. Of course, the sadder irony is Imagawa's words would ring true well after Giant Robo was completed. The 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster occurred, proving right everything he put into GR the decade before. Obvious errors in corner cutting, corrupt upper management not interested in paying to mitigate known risks in the design of the reactor, vulnerabilities inherent to that design, warned of years in advance. No, the distance from Tokyo, large corporate bureaucracy, the distance of paperwork, helped hide these issues until it was too late. Once more, the age of happiness, the functioning society, came with sacrifice. The new age was built on misfortune, turned to tragedy. It would have been all too easy then to make this work simply condemnatory, but it is the fact this work embraces both sides which stood out to me and still does. Imagawa. The Shizuma drive is the ideal energy drive. That's the nuclear power we're talking about, that's far away. And the one in Tokyo is Giant Robo. That's the nuclear power we'd hate to have nearby. Dangerous nuclear power. The story reverses that. That's what the story is about. So I started writing Giant Robo with the idea that if I could depict the battle between nuclear power that may be necessary and nuclear power that might not be necessary and create my own story. It's just that nuclear power is scary if it exists, but we'd be in trouble if it didn't. So I can't say which is better. That's why Robo is a symbol. Even as I write this, I must inform those unaware that I am personally a large proponent of nuclear energy, even though I also condemn the use of nuclear weapons in war. The climate issues we face, combined with the fact our society needs so much electricity, make nuclear energy's comparatively low carbon footprint and consistent supply essentially mandatory, as a thing to back up renewable power's infinite but fluctuating generation capacity. But what it also reminds me of is the excellent film my mother showed me many years ago, 1960's Inherit the Wind, based on the real-life Scopes monkey trial, in which a Tennessee teacher was put on trial for teaching evolution instead of creationism. It's an excellent film. It's a film fundamentally about our fear and disdain for the change brought about by technology and progress. Spencer Tracy's phenomenal speech, delivered on how progress is never free, that you must always pay for it. Every seeming advancement comes the difficult sacrifice of something else. In the case of nuclear power, as I've just gone over, its violent birth and apocalyptic applications. But as we are well aware now, even the automobile, or the mobile phone, everything from plastic straws to microchips have costs. Psychological costs and environmental costs, cultural and societal costs. But at the same time, this work is not some Luddite appeal. It isn't either some Miyazakian agrarianism. But neither is it some bold-faced fanatical embracing of technology either. Imagawa. In the end, maybe I started tackling a question that I couldn't easily answer no matter how I thought about it. And in the end, that might have been my answer. So what I wanted to convey wasn't think about the nuclear power issue, but rather that even things we overlook in everyday life might be shifted to a different perspective, with just a little effort, and that things we overlook might unexpectedly become good clues and triggers for new thoughts in our minds. I wanted to convey that these things do happen. One of the major themes that emerges clearly in the story is the question, can happiness be achieved without sacrifice? In response to that, the conclusion was reached that truth has meaning and value through questioning it. It's a non-answer, but thinking is what gives value to truth. In the spirit of that, it's easy to see how its inspirations essentially show the same. The Bionic Woman two-parter and the Space 1999 episode are both about amazing nuclear scientists who have created incredible technology. 1999's Queller with an advanced nuclear propulsion system, one which inadvertently kills any alien race it comes into contact with. And the Bionic Woman's with the use of a planet-threatening neutron bomb, its creator holding the world hostage in the name of preventing nuclear war with the ultimate mutually assured destruction. So if technology is cast in this dual light as both curse and blessing, what then is the true antagonist if it's not just scientific progress or the rejection of that progress? Well, dear viewer, much as in Gundam, Faulkner's words ring true. The human heart in conflict within itself, within the beating of the nuclear age. For something else is revealed in Episode 5. In flashbacks, we see the lead-up to the tragedy of Bashtarl, the event which destroyed that nation and devastated the energy supply of the world. The truth of those events provides us an answer here as well. It was not Vogler's mad science which caused it, in the face of the other scientists. Rather, the motive for Genya's revenge was that it was none other than Vogler who wanted to wait. An error, a mathematical deviation of 2% was found, and Vogler was the one to voice caution and hesitation. It was the other scientists, led by Shizuma, who wanted to push the envelope. That those scientists who experiment and succeeded were those who were also awarded with fame and glory, to make the completely clean, recyclable new energy source, in essence the mother of all omelets, they would inevitably have to crack a few eggs. Thus, they proceed with the experiment only to prove Vogler's worries correct. The drive was imperfect, and the tragedy of Bashtarl set in motion. Vogler stays behind to try and prevent it, to ensure the project would not fail and take with it humanity's best chance for green energy. But he ends up vilified as the culprit and scapegoat for the ensuing disaster. It would be dishonest not to mention the obvious example here of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the physicist to whom both praise and blame was piled on for his role as the so-called father of nuclear weapons. I'm reminded in particular of his speech, given scarcely a few months after their deployment to the Japanese, in November of 1945. Oppenheimer. Atomic weapons are based on things that are the very frontier of physics. Their development is inextricably entangled with the growth of physics, as in all probability with that of biological sciences and many practical arts. What is not contingent is that we have made a thing, a most terrible weapon that has altered abruptly and profoundly the nature of the world. We have made a thing that, by all standards of the world we grew up in, is an evil thing. By so doing, by our participation in making it possible to make these things, we have raised again the question of whether science is good for man, or whether it is good to learn about the world, to try to understand it, to try to control it, to help gift to the world of men increased insight, increased power. Because we are scientists, we must say an unalterable yes to these questions. It is our faith and our commitment, seldom made explicit, even more seldom challenged, that knowledge is a good in itself, knowledge and such power as must come with it. That may sound very positive, but even he ended his speech with, whatever the individual motivation and belief of the scientist, without that recognition from his fellow men of the value of his work in the long term, science will perish. I do not believe that it will be possible to transcend the present crisis in a world in which the works of science are being used, that they're being knowingly used for ends men hold evil. In such a world, it will be of little help to try to protect the scientist from restraints, from controls, from an imposed secrecy which he rightly finds incompatible with all he has learned to believe and to cherish. Therefore, it does seem to me necessary to explore somewhat the impact of the advent of atomic weapons on our fellow men, and the courses that might lie open for averting the disaster they invite. In this way, I found and still find Giant Robo to be one of the best works in Japanese SF, which truly seems to grapple well with the nature of its subject. Not just of atomic weapons or energy, but technology as a whole. I would like to say that we are wiser now and in a better place, but sadly the last few years and their so-called AI revolution has sadly shown the opposite. That insofar as we are now, we have progressed very little. The ghost of modernism haunts us still, and I will leave that to the next section. For now, it's worth noting the ensuing events and the dynamic of the characters within them. Obvious enough, it is this strong parallel between Daisaku and Genya which pushes Imagawa's philosophy to the forefront. Both sons of scientists who gave birth to incredible machines, who made promises to dying fathers. As Imagawa noted in that interview, Robo and the Shizuma Drive are a mirrored pair. As such, Daisaku and Genya are the inheritors of that mirroring and its heavy implications. Daisaku is driven to help save the world, and Genya, his antipole, is dead set on punishing it for putting the blame of Bashtarl on his father. In the frigid mountains of China, Genya orchestrates a hostage exchange for the case with the last sample he will return, Daisaku. Ginrei and Tetsugu attempt to ambush Genya, but once more the unkillable Koenshaku foils them, and Tetsugu dies, or seems to die, heroically trying to save Daisaku. Genya almost captures the case, but at the last moment, Robo destroys Genya's Gallop robot, and they are taken back to Ryozenpaku to recover. Alberto overhears Genya's true origin and is killed, trying to stop his plot for revenge. Genya withdraws with the Eye of Vogler to the Tower of Babel, Big Fire's headquarters and stronghold. There, the very cool Magnificent Ten convene. All over the world, even there, secret operations have been devastated by Genya's anti-Shizuma field. With the last remaining oil fields in Shanghai also destroyed, many question what the final goal was. As the true identity of Genya dawns on the other members, they, very coolly, show off their abilities as they move to stop him. A lot of cool Yokoyama cameos here, including none other than Big Fire's own three Guardians, who, scheming with Kome, foil their attempts. It's a part of the OVA where you can really feel the staff just kinda used it as an excuse to do some cool-ass wuxia stuff. It is during this that Daisaku awakes, finding Robo repaired but sealed away under Ryozenpaku, with Ginrei also healing but sealed within. Daisaku protests, but Murasame appears, stating bluntly, along with Issei and Go, that the risk of Robo's nuclear reactor is too great, and that Ginrei's loyalty is now in question. It is during her healing that she dreams a memory from long ago. Now, as I might enjoy to say our issue is over, it sadly isn't. The subject of Ginrei's bright golden dream and the darkness which it speaks of, technology, progress, and the ghost of modernism, as well as the future of our civilization. It is now time to try to answer Giant Robo's much more difficult second question. The future has given the light of glory to the men of the present. Yes, the time has finally come when we will conquer all our fears. Ancient man rubbed together pieces of wood to create fire. For oil, men once fought and killed the whale, and later they fought and killed each other. Then came the nuclear age. In every age we have lived with such dangers all around us. But now it will be different. We no longer need to fear. The night is finally ours. This time for certain we will have our beautiful night. This is not an illusion. One day, on a summer afternoon 20 years ago in the past, a shadow took over my city. Lights, traffic, computers, TVs, radios, and so on, all went dark. Where I lived, a city of millions, was plunged into darkness. It took them days to work on fixing and restoring it. Suddenly, everything had changed. Neighbors talked to neighbors. Food was carefully preserved. I remember running around my backyard with my friend from across the street. Our parents cooked on the barbecue and clustered around my dad's hand-crank radio. There was no school, as it was summer, but now even vacation as well was interrupted. The streets were silent and the number of cars and drivers shrunk like I'd never known it. We did everything by candlelight, read books, and mostly played board games. A strange kind of spell had fallen over everyone and everything. It was exciting, and it was, in a way, like taking a vacation, without ever leaving home. The whole world had changed and shrunk. What you could see, what you could do, who you could talk to. The news came in by radio that it wasn't just my city, but the whole Northeast. Then, those few days later, probably no more than 3 or 4, it all came back. Life resumed. The lights came on again. Now, in the summer, when the grid is stretched thin by, as Imagawa noted before, mostly air conditioners, every so often, a brownout or blackout will happen. Not on the scale of that night 20 years ago, but within each a memory of those long shadows hangs in my mind. In those moments, I reread old books or comics, or go for long walks. I would be lying if it didn't make me feel somewhat anxious. To those of us born into the information age, we grow used to the hum and noise and heartbeat of the digital nerves of humankind. It is then so ironic that in those moments, I am living closer to the vast majority of my ancestors, to many people who live still today in remote or less well-off places. But as I noted last section, I am not free of the curse, the paradox of Laputa. However, it is in that darkness that the words of Dr. Vogler and Imagawa echo in my mind. Whereas the last section was hopeful, this one will be honest. Honest and brutally true. It is time for me to tell you of this work's second question. It is time finally to talk of those beautiful nights. For the majority of the Middle Ages in Europe, to live in a city was a dangerous thing. Cities were, by their proximity of dense populations, locations for disease. The same densities created dark alleyways, canals, and clusters of rooms, places for assault, for pickpocketing and murder. Only to add to it, the waste dumped into the streets. Outside of their tall protective walls, cities were not beautiful places, really. Likewise, most humans didn't live in them. Most humans tended to do some kind of farm or field work outside their walls. If you want a great encapsulation of what it felt like, I highly recommend the first Thief: The Dark Ages game. The darkness was both a moral and physical state of being. It is these same shadows from which the Caped Crusader Batman would have his Stygian legend emerge. But obviously enough, something changed. As is very visible in Thief 2. Industrialization. And with that change, many things took on a new light. The torches and candles of old gave way first to oil, then electrified lamps. But the same industries which created light also did something else. They began a reversal of the flow of the currents of human civilization itself, out of the fields and into the cities. For now, the generation of the stuff of life, plants and animals, could be handled by machines. With that, the number of people needed to live on farms began the downward spiral which continues to this very day. They moved, where else, but to the city, where the dense factories and industries made new jobs available. The Age of Enlightenment grew both in intellect and luminescence. And perhaps the greatest symbol of that has already been before us all within Giant Robo itself. Tell me, did you ever find it odd that of all the places Genya begins his revenge plot, it happens to be Paris? He could have begun in New York, or Tokyo, or Moscow, or really anywhere. But as you likely already have started to realize, Imagawa choosing this location was no coincidence. The City of Light is a name now utterly meaningless to modern humans. Aren't all cities lit up? Once more, we must defy the paradox of Laputa to realize the truth. Once they were wreathed in dark, deep shadow. But first in torches, then gas, and finally with electricity and the light bulb. From the 17th century, through monarchs, the revolution, through Napoleon, to the founding of the first modern European republic. The light of Paris was in both its physical illumination and its knowledge. No, it's no coincidence the still Earth operation began here. The darkness of shadow, the darkness of ignorance, were banished by the light of science, progress, and industry. And from that blinding light was born, in turn, something else. Something I've already mentioned, as Andrew R. Tallon defined it in the Encyclopedia of Climate Change. The artistic, architectural, and intellectual movements of the 18th to 20th centuries that challenged the conventions of realism and romanticism within the arts by exploring the ideas of newness and expressing them as new aesthetics. Ideas of modern are most commonly defined through their opposition to the old and traditional. Hence, modern is synonymous with newness, and modernity refers to post-traditional, the historical epoch within which newness is produced and valued, as well as to the economic, social, political, and cultural formations characteristic of that period. More generally, modernism is often associated with the 20th century belief in the virtues of progress, order, science, technological change, rationality, and the planned management of social change. From that blinding light, from that adamant drive for progress, modernism spread. But to those like myself, likely yourself, born into an environment of constant light, we learn to despise and fear the night. To banish it, as Vogler says, we killed the whale and each other. The consequences of our progress was a Europe reduced to lunar crater fields, gas chambers, the machine gun, and the atomic evaporation of none other than foreign cities. But humans cling to the ghost of modernism for a good reason. It demands nothing of us save the will to experiment and sacrifice something, preferably far away, to attain it. I didn't have to do much to earn a smartphone besides pay for it. Technological advancement does not, as those Enlightenment thinkers hoped, absolutely equate to moral or social progress. It is entirely possible, and history has confirmed, to end up with, as Martin Luther King Jr. put it, our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and unguided men. Here, Giant Robo provides us with a super symbol made manifest. The Shizuma Drive, a limitless power source, non-polluting and recyclable. The Shizuma Drive is to modernism what the Philosopher's Stone is to alchemy. It is within this framework that Vogler's line exists, that humankind would no longer need to fear the beautiful-looking night. Once more, when I watched Giant Robo for the first time, I truly failed to consider or understand it. In retrospect, it would have been much simpler to have Vogler be a more traditional super scientist, like Jonas Venture Sr. of the Venture Bros, a true neo-modernist, one who could speak about how the night will no longer exist, or something like, now the lights of human knowledge will never dim. And yet, instead, Vogler's line isn't about that. Vogler's recurring line is instead the praising of the night. There is something inherently beautiful to it that we have never been able to access. The flashback in episode 6 further expands on this. He speaks of how the creation of fire freed us from the fear of the night, but it also came at a horrible cost. The destruction of fellow humans, and the destruction of the environment. To keep the lights on at night, something somewhere must generate power, as Imagawa noted in the previous section. As long as it was distant, we could learn to ignore it. I must admit here myself that I personally prefer to sleep with some kind of fan, or something mechanical going, so you could say I've kind of lived Vogler's point. Really though, the final piece of understanding of Vogler's sentiment came many years later. Depressing, challenging, and difficult as it is, I now give it to you as well. In 1968, in Rome, a gathering of intellectuals formed the simply named Rome Club. Together, working for several years, they published a book, but really a report, or perhaps even a prophecy of sorts. In 1971, it looked at the economy from the macro scale. Rather than the GDP of a nation or the trade between continents in isolation, it saw it for what it truly was. All human activity on Earth is merely the managed and processed excess energy from the sun, deposited on this, our one and only homeworld. With this all-encompassing mindset, they, to the best of their abilities, modeled everything from population, food production, industrialization, pollution, and consumption of non-renewable resources. Using the computer technology of the time, they then applied these models together. The result, uncomfortable as it is nonetheless harrowing. The dream of modernism, its horrible ghost, would peak sometime in the first half of the new millennium's first century, then decline drastically. The growth of economies is driven by population growth. Rapid industrialization is ultimately driven by that same growth, as people need to earn and work in jobs. And that population increase and industry need to consume resources. Put simply, we exist on a finite world, yet many of our systems expect some form of infinite growth. The criticism to this theory was fast. Many proclaimed how these simulations were flawed. Others noted that it was at best only an abstraction. But what made me take note was amongst the critics were listed such a huge swath of voices. On the one hand, capitalists disliked it because it criticized the bedrock of growth our economic systems rely on, to always buy and consume more. And as much as we hate inflation, deflation is only the more disastrous or poisonous to our systems. Leftists and communists disliked it because the ideas of Marx as well were founded on the notion that through industry, there was plenty needed, but that merely it was who owned it and received it that was the issue. The Catholic Church disliked it because be fruitful and multiply is a fundamental element of that and many other religions. And of course it saw much protestation from scientists as well. Those who insisted that through recycling and new technology, old resources could be turned into new ones. Through the headless God which has had 1,000 names, the one everyone from Edison to tech bros worship at the feet of, this uncomfortable truth could be beaten. Automation, AI, fusion power, so on and so forth. Even to this day, this book and the Club of Rome get brought up as part of vast conspiracies to decrease the population, usually but not always involving perhaps aliens or some kind of Jewish world order. Some of which ended up in very good games like Deus Ex. When a thing, though, is so wildly dismissed across such a huge swath, it does to me sound a lot like the truth it speaks on is so fundamentally challenging to our assumptions that many people have a hard time even accepting the possibility. Now that book was obviously enough made 50 years ago. We are now entering into that time of crisis. Obviously enough, the systems that be have not collapsed. Their model was of course imperfect. Yet, much of what they did point out has started to or has already come true to some extent. India and China, the two nations with the highest density and population of humans, born from the fertile river valleys amplified by technology, are both showing signs of slowing. Recycling, as much as I do support it, and I think you should as well, is not the same as initial processing. If the cost of recycled materials exceeds what was once the cost of processing the original unrefined material, then everything built on that material will grow ever more expensive. The African rare earth minerals in your smartphone, the many hundreds of kilograms of refined aluminum and steel in your car. The issue, once more, and I stress it, is not that we will run out, but that life as we know it is dependent on a ubiquity of access, an ease of access. The same goes for fertilizers, the sand used for concrete, even the scariest of all, seemingly endless iron or copper ore. To say nothing of the unforgivably non-recyclable plastics which we still use in vast quantities. Put even more bluntly, we in the West enjoy our high standard of living by the ability to cheaply import resources from what was once called the Third World. We then process them or send them to other nations with cheap labor to cheaply process them into finished goods that we buy. These nations, and the ones we get the resources from, are controlled and managed through vast economic systems of debt. These systems are in turn enabled by the surplus of cheap labor in South America, Asia, and Africa. The labor is cheap because, as well, the populations there are high. Higher populations make labor plentiful and competitive. But higher populations are in turn also enabled by surpluses in food, brought about by what I began with: industrialization and its applications to agriculture. Even in the last century alone, the ability to genetically engineer more resistant strains of crops highly enhanced this. The same bedrock which enabled the construction, all those many eons ago, of the Great Wall of China or the Great Pyramids or any complex modern human civilization. So, what happens if the pollution caused by this system builds up? What happens if the climate then shifts? What happens if the crops fail? If it stops raining regularly or too frequently? What happens if the ability to count on that massive spire of circumstances is no longer really viable? What if the foundations of our mechanical modernity turn out to be, as in Matthew 26, built not on rock, but sand? Adjusted models of the limits of growth have been reapplied, and more than any one model, the evidence mounts. Already in Africa, water droughts are common. Australia experiences them as well. Here in my native Canada, huge forest fires sweep the summers. Dust storms and other perturbations increase year after year in the American Southwest, and worse hurricanes in the Southeast. For now, we can go about our business. In the West, we are, by virtue of our prosperity, at the larger world's expense, insulated from the immediate consequences, as always. But the growing feeling in the pit of my stomach when I hear people dismiss these issues is the image of two Hittites in Hattusa, sometime around 1180 BCE, saying, "Oh, don't worry, the bronze shipment it's just a little late this month. It'll be fine, don't worry. It'll be fine." When I first learned of all this, the words of Vogler came back to haunt me. That perhaps this, all of this, the need to have ever more, the need to grow in population with machines and technology, hell, even now, the denial there even is a climate change, or equally maddening, "Don't worry, the AI and machines will save us." All of it, it is all the same shrieking cries of fear that the hairy early human made as they struck at the shadows around their fire in the face of the night. All of it fails to accept the reality of the situation because the alternative is so downright terrifying. That the night is in truth beautiful, and if we could accept that, we would truly be free. In my lifetime, and in the lifetime of my children and grandchildren, the human species will have to come to terms with that fact. It is undeniable. It is objectively true. That it is okay for there to be less of us, for us to eat less, to buy less, to travel less. The driving, reproductive competition which made us kill one another to bring blinding light to the world has been in its own way a kind of curse. We won't go extinct. Nothing will totally end, but it is so fundamentally terrifying to our worldview. This is what Vogler speaks of to his son Emmanuel and daughter Falmel. The hope to create this world. A world born of scientific light, but also through that of accepting and freedom. Vogler's wish with the Shizuma Drive was not to create a world where man could rule as scientific despots over the earth, but to create one where, now removed from those limitations, finally, humankind could grow to free itself of the fundamental psychological fear which had driven us so wantonly. To be, relative to nature, to the earth, as Tomino put it in Zeta, the firm moral and technological shepherds of that earth. Because the alternative is far worse. The fundamental collapse, the systems collapse, the polycrisis in which all the human progress we have bled for will be lost. People will give in to tribalism, to racist excuses and denial as they already do, self-preservation, war and conflict to ensure one group lives with a surplus while others die. Our notions of human rights, the values of human life, hard fought and won, now lost. This is the cruel twist of fate Emmanuel, taking the name Genya, enacts on the world with the Still Earth operation. The removal of the fundamental bedrock of our modern civilization. The beast inside us will win out, shrieking in fear at the night. I doubt as a species we would go absolutely extinct in this worst-case scenario, but to the inheritors of the world, when things stabilize 100, 300, 500, or 1,000 years from now, the world they will receive will be one far more depleted of the resources required, far more polluted for far more eons, and everything we take for granted now from the Laputan paradox and curse will seem almost mythical in its bounty. Through these contemplations on this amazing work, I arrived at the meaning of the beautiful night, difficult as they are to accept. What I can say now is that, more commonly, when the power does go out in the summer, I try to enjoy the familiar locations in their novel darkness. Doing so helps dispel the anxieties of the night. With that, we may now conclude. The final climax of Giant Robo is, as its musical track appropriately describes, history's greatest climactic battle. Ginrei, deciding to trust her father's plan, teleports the entire Mount Ryuzenpaku to St. Abe, the site of the world's last remaining operational Shizuma reactor, built on the ruins of where Bashtaral was destroyed 10 years previous. Daisaku, having grown throughout the series, who has felt the weight of the other characters' sacrifices, has to muster his courage to take down Genya's Eye of Vogler, despite knowing Ginrei is now on board. The massive cast of Yokoyama's heroes and villains are on display. To delay the sphere, Chief Chujo unleashes his frankly incredibly cool Big Bang Punch. All the while, the scheming Kome watches the events unfold with the captured heads of Big Fire. Robo is repaired and powered up as the final battle is commenced. The Eye of Vogler destroys all but the last reactor tower. As the most critical moment, Daisaku finds the courage to stand and command Robo to fight back. As I mentioned much earlier, all of it almost didn't happen. Imagawa's original idea was supposed to constitute a single 70-minute OVA. Interviewer. Was the 7-volume structure set in stone as well? Katayama. Actually, it was originally planned to be a medium-length movie-sized work with a self-contained story and a running time of 70 minutes. At the time of the camp, I thought the story can be wrapped up in 70 minutes. However, when I started drawing the storyboards, I realized that the story couldn't be contained in one film and that it needed to be divided into several films. Speaking further, Katayama notes, Interviewer. Was it because it was an OVA that you were able to take time to experiment? Katayama. It is true, we had a little more time and money than for TV, but it wasn't that easy. There is no air date like TV, but OVAs do have a sales date deadline. Furthermore, we have to make the software, such as laserdiscs and videos, in factories and accordingly, so the deadlines were even tighter than for TV. I think the reason there was room for trial and error in Giant Robo's production side was because the producer, Yamaki, had an understanding of the production process. Deadlines were set, but Yamaki didn't say anything too strict. Many of the staff who worked on it all seemed to express a similar sentiment. It was insane that they pulled it off, but they were glad they did. Imagawa noting, Interviewer. It took 7 years to complete. Looking back on that journey, how do you feel now? Imagawa. To be honest, I didn't think it would take so long. But really, Giant Robo was tough. At the time they started making Giant Robo, the concept of an OVA was just beginning to take shape. But it wasn't as widespread as it is today. With Giant Robo, I wanted to cleanly establish the proper form of a video series. OVAs are different from theatrical works and TV series, right? I think video works have a style of storytelling and setting that can only be achieved through video. So while maintaining the same tone in each episode, I experimented with various elements. In that sense, we often found ourselves stuck thinking, we've done this before, or there's no different from the first one. We would really struggle with how to come up with something new every time. Sometimes we would think of something later and have to revise it again. That happened a lot, especially in the beginning. Producer Yamaki adding from the complete recording. Yamaki. Dear fans, thank you so much for sticking with us for so long on this GR project. Since we visited Yokoyama's home 8 years ago to obtain permission for the anime adaptation, there have been so many ups and downs along the way. To be honest, I'm overwhelmed with emotion, thinking, finally, it's done. In the early days, there was heated debates with Imagawa, the signs that couldn't be finalized even with a talented staff like Kuboka and Yamashita. Storyboards that went through countless revisions, and the Warsaw recording sessions carried out amidst the sour mood around us. All of that culminated in the extraordinary excitement of the first episode's dubbing. Such difficulties repeated themselves time and again, and as you all know, rumors that Robo has been cancelled circulated more than once or twice. When the dubbing for the final episode was completed, I felt a sense of relief that it was finally over, and all those days flashed through my mind. Now I am caught up in preparation for the next project, and in the end, I am repeating the same process with Giant Robo. This time the project was realized within 1.5 years from the planning stage, which is unusually quick for one of my works. But I am striving to create a work that will be loved by everyone, just like Giant Robo. It took years of passionate hard work to bring it to life. Amano mentions in the commentary how when they initially started making the soundtrack, they had to fax machine the music over to the Warsaw Philharmonic. By the end of production, they had already switched to computers and email, and how the entire thing evolved and endured through such a challenging longer time span than most projects of this quality need endure. As those aware also may know, the side series of Ginrei specials, 3 short half-hour episodes, were made to try and tide over fans. Now they are funny and pretty fun, but I haven't mentioned them until now, both because they're not really relevant, essentially just being lighthearted side projects, but also because they too essentially ended up being more work on the production staff. Interviewer. On the other hand, the spin-off Ginrei series attracted a lot of attention as well. Katayama. The Ginrei series was created because the budget for the main series was running low, and they wanted to make a lighthearted story with a girl as the main character that would make good money. Normally, when you are told to make a profitable work, the staff on site would complain or protest. But we were aware that we were doing whatever we wanted with the main series, so we were united in our efforts. I also designed the Ginrei robot Type 2, etc. without compensation. However, the producer, Yamaki, was a movie fanatic, so a lot of things were incorporated, and the story of the third film, Ginrei with the Blue Eyes, became more serious. The original plan was to make a profit by making a simple film, but I think it ended up costing a lot of money. Talk about putting the cart before the horse. So while fans were entertained, it also could have been during this period, stretched even thinner, where Robo failed or ended up doomed. Like I mentioned before, this was the common fate of many OVAs, either running out before they covered the scope of their story, or annotating and rushing it so much that the pacing ended up suffering. However, even through this, the project endured, ultimately to its fruition. The production staff likely convinced of the importance of finishing this grand work they had begun on. And one final quote from Imagawa sums up things nicely. Interviewer, in the end, multiple themes intertwined to form Giant Robo. That's right. Oh yeah, there's one more thing I want to mention. At the end, Daisaku rides in Robo's eye, right? That was the first image drawn when Yamaki and I started working on Giant Robo 10 years ago. We made sure to set a goal. That was the one thing we didn't change at all until the end. I was so happy we were able to make it. The cell of that shot is my memento. It finally came together after 10 years from the initial concept. In the first volume, Robo flies to rescue Daisaku using the auto-guard system. At the time, people around me often said, "Isn't that something you do in the final episode?" But because I had this in my final episode, I was able to do that first. It was the last resort for a robot story, right? That's how my robot stories are. There were various challenges, but I am thoroughly satisfied with the series, Giant Robo. With that, I could not agree more. So let us see through the finale of Giant Robo. As Robo comes up against the last defenses of the Eye of Vogler, it waits for Daisaku to join it. The ensuing sequence is to me one of the most impressive and wonderful moments in animation, mecha or otherwise. The skill displayed in the sequence, unsurprisingly part of this last episode's 1,000 cuts. To try and describe it with words is, I think, somewhat pointless. The visuals speak for themselves. It's an incredible thing, a thing which fills you with such an infection and such a passion to pursue, at least for me, my own creative dreams. Finally helped up the last slope by the wills and spirits of all those who sacrificed themselves to get him there. Daisaku joins the spirit of his father in Robo's damaged eye. If this scene doesn't make you tear up even just a tiny bit, you don't have a soul. The grand spirit of the epic manifests itself in this moment. With Robo buckling under the defensive field of the Eye of Vogler, the man, the amazing man, Shockwave Alberto, emerges, giving an incredible speech as he uses all his mortal power to drain the protective field from the sphere. An incredible exit for an incredible character. Its last protections gone, Daisaku and Robo launch their huge final assault. The sphere of Vogler is at last stopped. However, in its 12th hour, the scale of the plot's details are revealed. Genya kills Ginrei, and taking the last sample he had long sought after, begins what he thinks to be his father's greatest revenge, the destruction of the atmosphere of Earth. But one final tragic twist of fate is in store. With all the samples combined, the ghost of Vogler speaks by projection. His plan was not to doom the Earth, but that the normal Shizuma drives were flawed. They were unwittingly emitting the form of pollution, which could destroy the Earth's atmosphere all by themselves. Left running, these devices in a decade would achieve this disaster. Thus the fruition of Vogler's plot was not to doom the world, but fix that final erroneous 2%. The flaw which had doomed Bashtaral. Vogler's ideal, the dream of the beautiful night, is at last created. Ironically enough, the heroes had unwittingly been preventing the dying scientist's final noble deed. Genya, made aware of his father's true plan, having fixed all the Shizuma drives in their error, decides to teleport the self-destructing Eye of Vogler into space. With that, the sun dawns on the new age. The 7 days the world held still are over. As Daisaku lives to see that new dawn, something else stirs. The elite of Big Fire free themselves, only for Kome to reveal all of this was merely the pre-show to the true climax. Deep in the control room of Babel, someone awakens. Operation Still Earth is now over, but Operation GR and the final showdown, the Siege of Babel, has yet to occur. It is a perfect ending. As much as Robo's first episode threw us into a rich and complex world, Yokoyama's world, the ending does likewise. The Day the Earth Stood Still was written as part 6 of a 7-part story, but hopefully you won't be too disappointed when I tell you that this is the end of this project, and the other parts were never meant to be made. As Katayama said from the 30th anniversary book. Interviewer: this series has been described as one episode in the epic Imagawa version of Giant Robo, but was that the original idea? Katayama: Imagawa-san was saying from quite early on. I was listening to him thinking, he's talking nonsense again. But I think he had a grand idea in mind. Perhaps he was planning to make a sequel if the opportunity arose. But at the wrap party for the last episode, the bigwigs clearly stated there will be no sequel to this work. Normally this would have been a disappointment, but all the staff seemed relieved. As they say in showbiz, leave your audience wanting more. You can always, as I did, take this opportunity to explore the works of Yokoyama. I certainly found it enjoyable to do so, and so for now I hopefully have shown both how much I love this work, and how much it was driven by the raw artistic passion to become a true pillar of Japanese animation that it is, the efforts needed to create it, and the meaning of its 2 questions. Since I first watched this OVA some long 13 years ago, I have matured a lot. Like Daisaku, I grew up from a punk fresh in high school to an adult. I set out only to learn more about the world and to enjoy works like this. But through these 2 difficult questions, I was confronted with humankind's history and our relationship to amazing technologies, our relationship to the world we live in. I stated in the beginning, it led me to hope, and in truth, it did. Not the hope of an easy or obvious solution, but the hope in knowing exactly the nature of our problems. The hope of finally getting a bead on some of the fundamental issues of our modern life. I would like to thank Giant Robo directly for honestly preventing me, a lifelong SF nerd, from falling into the trap of becoming a tech bro or some kind of general neo-modernist. As I matured, I saw the truth GR spoke on, that technology alone will not save us, be it in AI or drones or robotics many years later, or even possibly fusion power. That it was the spiritual and intellectual core of humankind which had to change, not the machines of its material reality. Society got better when people got better, and while machines enabled that, they alone were not the magic bullet to solve our world problems. It helped me understand that our daily fixation on these technologies also won't ensure happiness either. Buying a fast new car or a new computer, taking an expensive vacation, or some new gadget alone will not do that in a meaningful way. We personally, as individuals, also need to confront and defeat the ghost of modernism. We need to step beyond the paradox of Lapida and see the long and difficult road which got us here and what it cost. Until we reach that stage, where we can accept the beautiful night and understand the sacrifices that created happiness, then, and only then, will we be able to open the doors of progress and move into the future yet to come.